Okay, folks, I think we should get started now. Welcome to you all. It's a great pleasure to see you here for this event that is being co-sponsored by the Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences here at Queen Mary and by the Stuart Hall Foundation. My name's Kim Hutchings. I'll just say a few introductory words and then I'll hand over to Gilles Tawdros just to say a few words around the Stuart Hall Foundation before we get to the main event, which is, of course, Professor Michael Walzer speaking. So a very warm welcome to all of you, particularly anybody who hasn't been to Queen Mary before tonight. The Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences is aiming really to bring together the very best of interdisciplinary scholarship at Queen Mary and beyond. And it's great to be co-hosting tonight's event. I want to extend a special thanks and welcome to Professor Walzer for coming here to speak to us. It's a huge honour to have him here. His work, as you know, so many of you will know, touches a chord with a lot of the things that we're concerned about here at Queen Mary, from his writings on justice and politics to his commitment to an engaged form of scholarship and his contributions to public debate. Now, some of you may have noticed, as advertised, we were also looking forward to welcoming Paul Lewis from The Guardian's new Populism programme. But as it turns out, Paul is having a baby. His wife's gone into early labour, so he's not able to join us tonight. So that gives Michael a little bit more scope to elaborate any remarks he might like to elaborate on, and gives us more opportunity to debate and discuss the issues. So it leaves us with more time to listen to Michael, to hear what he has to say. In discussing the present politics, Michael once quoted Yeats when he said, "Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold," and one could say the same thing of running orders of events. But perhaps some new ideas will be born tonight, as well as things sometimes not quite working out as you expect. In anticipation, therefore, of a fascinating evening, and in order to keep the discussion going, we invite you all to drinks afterwards so you can continue to probe what we've been investigating. So I'll now hand over to Gilles Tawdros, who will say something about the Stuart Hall Foundation, the co-sponsor of tonight's event. Oh, I should say, actually, this event is being live streamed, so just to let you know that.
Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you very much for chairing tonight's discussion. My name is Gilles Tawdros. I'm the chair of the Stuart Hall Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you all here to tonight's conversation. Conversation and dialogue was very much a hallmark of Stuart's way of engaging and thinking with others, and we hope that tonight will be just such an occasion to think together. For those of you who don't know about the Foundation, we're a young charity that was established 5 years ago by Stuart's family and friends to build on Stuart's extraordinary legacy. He was one of the most important public intellectuals that this country has produced. Also a teacher and educator, a godfather of the Black Arts movement here in the UK, and someone who is involved in politics at every level. And these interests, these overlapping spheres of activity and engagement were all interconnected for Stuart, and they were a means for him to explore something which is a continuous thread through his work, which is how do you probe, how do you understand in a profound and nuanced way the conjuncture we're in, the particular moment that we're experiencing. And I don't think a day's gone by in the last 3 or 4 years when I haven't wondered or wanted to engage Stuart in a conversation about this current conjuncture and what it means, and how perhaps we missed the signs that maybe Stuart would have spotted about how we've come to this current moment. But I'm looking forward very much to the conversation tonight, and just want to say a few brief thanks. Thanks to Paul Lewis, who I know was prepared for this event and as Kim said, can't be here today. To Queen Mary University for co-hosting tonight. To Dr. Simon Reed Henry, Director of the Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences, who's helped make this possible, and Sophia Kasana, who's Executive Officer for the Mile End Institute, June Reed from Queen Mary, who helped us tonight, to Harriet Florio, who's Office and Project Manager at the Foundation, and to the trustees Michael and Susanna Rustin, who first approached Michael and secured his agreement to participate. And finally to Vansenka Kamiemi from Naked Politics, who, if you haven't seen it, has done a wonderful interview with Michael. And thank you, Kimberly, for chairing, but the hugest thanks to you, Michael. You've just flown in today. Adverse travel conditions, as I understand, but it's a real honour and a privilege to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much.
So I'm very glad to be here and very grateful to the two sponsors of this event. I'm going to talk about American politics today, sticking to what I know best. But since Paul Lewis isn't here, I hope that in the discussion some of you will say something about authoritarian populism in this country, and perhaps some of you also can talk about the continent. So I will be talking about America, but I want to start from what Stuart Hall said in 1979 in a wonderful essay called The Great Moving Right Show about authoritarian populism and social democracy. It's interesting to imagine Margaret Thatcher, that's who he was writing about, as an early authoritarian populist. Times have changed, and I guess the species has gone into the decline. It may be parochial of me, but I do believe that our ignorant, corrupt, reckless, narcissistic president represents a low point in the history of authoritarian populism. But I want to focus on one part of Stuart's essay, not what he said about Thatcherism, but what he said about social democracy, since I think of myself as a social democrat. Stuart wrote about social democracy playing what he called a natural part in the rise of figures like Margaret Thatcher, a part defined by the central contradiction of social democratic politics. And his account of the contradiction is nuanced. Mine will be very quick. It's a contradiction between the electoral role of social democracy as representative of the working class and the governing role of social democracy as rescuer of capitalism. So I recognize the roles. Our President Obama played the second in pretty much the way Stuart describes, using the interventionist state for the rescue and opening the way for an anti-statist populism. But I want to deny that the two roles have only one natural form. In the United States in the 1930s and here after 1945, rescuing capitalism turned out to be consistent with a very strong program of social reform. Beginning in the late 1970s, there was a very specific failure of social democratic or center-left politics. And again, I'll be talking about the United States, where the Democratic Party represents a very weak version of that politics, but it's the best that we've been able to do. There were a lot of good social democrats who were critical of Obama's economic policy in 2009 when he did rescue American capitalism. and who were critical earlier on of Clinton's third way, a phrase used to describe and sometimes to boast about a retreat from the center-left to the center, the end of welfare as we know it, in Clinton's words. The policies that we were criticizing, which we didn't think natural to social democracy, had a result that we only partially anticipated. And I want to describe that result with a tale of two cities. I grew up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, a steel town in the 1940s and early 50s when I lived there. Beginning in 1941, it was also a union town. The city had been a Republican stronghold dominated by Bethlehem Steel, but after the steelworkers voted 4-1 for the Steelworkers Organizing Committee, it became firmly Democratic. I remember Harry Truman speaking from the back of a railway car in 1948. He carried the city by a large margin. Today, Johnstown is a Rust Belt city. The mills are closed. The population is about 2/3 of what it was in the 1940s. These days, I live in Princeton, New Jersey, a university town which is also home to many well-to-do doctors and lawyers and to a significant group of bankers and brokers who commute every day to New York. Princeton is not in the top 10 of America's richest cities, but it's up there. These two cities provide a telling account of the 2016 presidential election. Johnstown voted for Trump by a 2-1 margin. Princeton voted for Hillary Clinton by an 8-1 margin. Amazing, 8-1 margin. Now, that's not the way it used to be, and it's not the way our old theories about class politics told us that it should be. The social base of the Democratic Party right now consists of well-educated professional men and women, a disproportionate number of women generally, and a strongly motivated but not sufficiently mobilized coalition of American minorities, chiefly blacks and Hispanics. Together, these groups could make an electoral majority, but in practice, they do that only half the time in presidential elections and much less often in state and local elections. We have been doing, until 2018, very badly in state and local elections. The old industrial working class is no longer the major presence in the Democratic Party that it once was. Even its unionized fragments are not fully reliable Democratic voters. So how did this happen? I don't believe in monocausal explanations. Any full response to that question would have to include many factors, but I am going to emphasize one. Over the last 4 or 5 decades, social democratic parties and politicians abandoned social democratic politics. In the United States, the New Deal Democrats forgot the New Deal. They failed to listen to, they failed to look after their own people, their natural constituency, working class men and women, suddenly vulnerable in a globalizing economy. You could say that they gave up one side of Stuart's contradiction. They became less contradictory. The decline of the unions in the United States, the radical decline of the unions, is a key sign, of center-left failure. It obviously has economic and technological causes, deindustrialization and automation, but it also has political causes. There has been an effective right-wing and corporate campaign against the existing unions and against unionization wherever it has been attempted, for example, in Japanese-owned automobile plants in the American South or throughout the service industries. A campaign aided and abetted by the economic ideology called neoliberalism. Social Democrats and American liberals failed to engage this ideology. Instead, they adopted it. And they governed, when they governed, in accordance with its strictures and in alliance with important sections of capital, especially finance capital. They failed to regulate the banks. They allowed hundreds of thousands of home foreclosures after the recession of 2008. They pursued trade agreements that didn't protect workers at home or abroad. They refused to use state power to promote unionization. They presided over a radical increase in inequality. They pursued growth over justice, claiming that growth would help everyone. And they refused to change their policies when it was clear that that wasn't happening. Instead, neoliberal economics and the accompanying politics helped, there were other causes, but helped to create a new and highly vulnerable working class. We call it the precariat, because the members of this class live extremely precarious lives. They mostly have jobs, but these are the new jobs of a post-industrial and non-union age. They are often part-time, temporary, insecure, low-paying, without benefits or with minimum benefits, and everywhere without union protection. Workers trapped in jobs like these, in depressed cities like Johnstown, are angry and resentful. They feel, I think justifiably, that they have been abandoned by the politicians who always claimed to be their protectors. A populist attack on elites resonates with them. But these Democratic politicians, these American center-left politicians, have not become right-wing politicians. They are the supporters, sometimes a little slow to come around, but supporters still of racial and sexual minorities and of feminism, which is, I think, the most successful social movement of recent decades. They defend abortion, they defend gay marriage, they defend affirmative action. They are focused on what are called social issues, and on these issues, they are good egalitarians. And the bourgeoisie of Princeton, New Jersey, loves them. Activists in these social movements have won victories, always incomplete, radically incomplete, less than we hoped for, but they have changed American society. The United States today is a better place for Black Americans than it has ever been. Women are a much larger presence in the professions, in law and medicine, in corporate management at every level, and in politics. Gay marriage today is widely accepted. It often seems wildly popular. All this took the hard work of movement militants, but it is today the politics of the Democratic Party. And yet, in the years that these victories were being won, these egalitarian victories, the United States became an increasingly unequal society. And that's something that we need to think about and I think worry about. It appears that capitalism can take in blacks and women at every level of the established hierarchies and still be capitalism. Our economic rulers practice discrimination less, but exploitation no less. Indeed, the hierarchies have gotten steeper and may be easier to defend because they are less discriminatory. Now, this is something that we didn't expect. Most people, I think, on the left, we have often said that capitalism is inherently patriarchal and racist. Well, capitalism is, in the West, in America, historically patriarchal and racist, but not inherently. We are now discovering that the logic of capitalism allows the incorporation of minorities. Not yet in proportion, women very close, are beginning to be close to proportionate positions in the professions. They are not there yet in corporate management, but there are now women at every level of corporate management. Blacks lagging behind, but still moving into positions where they never were before. And yet, America is less equal, more unequal than it has ever been. So we need to think about how that has happened. Now, the men and women at or near the bottom of the hierarchies, or those who feel themselves falling, they are the members of the precariat. Many of them are black, many are women, but these aren't the blacks or the women who benefited from the victories of the social movements. They are the ones who were left behind. Black Americans stuck with the Democrats in 2016, as did the poorest of the poor, who don't, however, vote in large numbers. But a lot of the white women, along with their men, voted for Donald Trump. This was especially clear in poor rural areas and in Rust Belt cities like Johnstown and across the Midwest. Hillary lost the election in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin. So, in the United States today, leftists and liberals are arguing about whether the focus of our politics should be on identity politics, which is shorthand for the social issues, or on class. But this isn't a possible choice for the left. We cannot give up the fight for racial and gender equality, which still has a way to go. We cannot give up that fight, or now the fight for the inclusion of immigrants. But we must, at the same time, return to the politics that we abandoned, the politics of class. It appears that two of the leading Democratic candidates have gotten this message. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are promoting large-scale redistributive policies, high taxes on the richest Americans, tough corporate and financial regulation, and a major reconstruction of the welfare state. I'm happy to support these policies, but together they have not yet produced the politics that we need. Sanders and Warren represent a version of left populism, which is not the same as social democracy. They have not coordinated the policies they advocate with what there is of the labor movement, with the largest and most active of the existing unions, the service workers, the teachers, and the auto workers, who are now on strike. I think they have just won a month-long strike. And the members of these unions are not enthusiastic about Warren and Bernie's Medicare for all, since they have won through difficult strikes and tough negotiations. They have won health care for the members of these unions that is better than Medicare. And there was never any consultation between Warren and Sanders and these unions. Sanders has, late in the day, come out with a very strong program for the state promotion of unionization. I think it's the direct product of the steel workers, the auto workers' strike. But it wasn't part of his original program. There is no, at the present time, there is no social movement behind these two left candidacies. Nor is there a political party committed to their proposals. The Democrats in Congress, in the House and the Senate, and the Democrats who will be running for Congress in 2020, in their large majority, are committed to proposals considerably to the right of Sanders and Warren. So they have support in the country. They have support in the remarkably rejuvenated organization called the Democratic Socialists of America, which in the last 2 years has grown from 8,000 members to 60,000 members and has officially endorsed Bernie Sanders. And many of its members, I'm afraid, are threatening not to vote for Elizabeth Warren, which is an example of the kind of left sectarianism that we do not need. So they have support in the country, especially among young people, but this is still a support focused on them. Now, they are not aspiring maximal leaders. They're not that kind of populists. But theirs is still a personalist politics. And even if the person wins, and Warren now seems the strongest candidate, even if she wins, I don't believe that you will be able to carry through a coherent program of social reconstruction, because we have not built a movement that can generate strong support for such a program. I want to end with a last worry about recent center-left politics in my country, and you can tell me whether it's anything to worry about here. One of the reasons for the alienation of many vulnerable or troubled Americans, especially white Americans, from the Democratic Party and from any farther leftism is their belief that they are now the people who are marginalized and degraded, that the elites who defend all the minorities hold them in contempt. It's hard to judge the importance of this belief relative, say, to the declining standard of living of these same people, which is probably much more important. But the belief is uncomfortably true. I'm going to give just one example. The causal role of contempt is less important than the simple fact that it exists. For leftists now and always, contempt for those who stand to our right is neither politically wise nor morally right. So, Tell Me How It Ends is a recent book published last year by a woman named Valerie Luzelli, and it is, as the blurbs say, and they are right, a brave and eloquent critique of American immigration policies. It has gotten a strong reception for its author's clear-eyed intelligence and marvelous literary imagination. And the book is indeed a persuasive critique of political positions, policies that obviously need criticism, in fact, need savage criticism. But please listen to one passage. Luzelli is commenting on a newspaper picture of Thelma and Don Christie of Tucson, Arizona, who are protesting against the arrival of undocumented immigrants. And this is what she says. I zoom in on their faces and wonder, what passed through the minds of Thelma and Don Christie when they prepared their protest signs? Did they pencil in protest against illegal immigrants on their calendars, right next to Mass and just before bingo? A friend read me those sentences and said, that's why Hillary lost the election. Well, not the only reason, but my friend had a point. We can't build a democratic politics of solidarity with attitudes like that. And attitudes like that are fairly common among the intellectual elite and even among men and women who think of themselves as leftist militants, as Luzelli certainly does, rightly does. We always insist on our commitment to the inclusion of the others. On the American left, othering is a social and political crime. But we need to think carefully about how we should relate to the others whom we have helped to create. Thank you.
Working. Oh, yes, it is. Thanks so much for that, Mike. A really thought-provoking, a very interesting talk, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of comments and questions coming. I had a sort of set of things I wanted to ask you about, but I was actually just really fascinated by where you ended and the whole issue of contempt. And I guess the relationship between morality and politics, in some sense, there. Is this new, though, or is this simply always been the way that people are? Is there something new happening in terms of how opponents are being constructed within the political realm, or is this just business as usual in some ways, do you think?
Well, there has always been an American elite culture which had a certain view of the people called white trash, hillbillies, and although I don't know the terms that were used, the evangelical Christians. But these people didn't play a significant part in American politics. So the discourse about them was a popular culture discourse. You could see it in the movies or on television or in the radio that I grew up in. And it went along with jokes about every other ethnic group. But what has happened in recent years is that this group of vulnerable people has not only grown, but it has entered politics. It has been mobilized for politics by people like Donald Trump. I think most American liberals, leftists, watching a Trump rally would feel complete, it's incomprehensible. Who are these people? Where did they come from? We never saw them before. And they are a powerful presence. And what is funny about them is that their entrance into politics has come over